I first encountered the writing of Jericho Parms when a fellow student and poet said I must read the essay A Chapter on Red, a lyric piece that takes a single color as its subject and somehow manages to discuss the complexity of love and loss and language, the impermanence and bittersweetness of beauty in only a few pages. Parms has a knack for writing prose that reads like poetry, images that startle, visceral memory that will bend suddenly into insight. Her recently published collection of essays, Lost Wax, is a mosaic of art, music, and reminiscence, which one reviewer describes as a portrait of a cultured life, born out of curiosity and relentless wonder. Jericho Parms received her MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her essays have appeared in Fourth Genre, The Normal School, Hotel America, Brevity, American Literary Review, and elsewhere. Her work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, noted in Best American Essays, and anthologized in Brief Encounters, a collection of contemporary nonfiction, and Waveform, 21st Century Essays by Women. She is the Associate Director of the MFA in Writing Program at Vermont College of Fine Arts and teaches in the Professional Writing Program at Chaplin College. Please join me in welcoming Jericho Parms.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Shmei. That was beautiful. Thanks for that introduction. And I was actually going to read from that piece today, Chapter on Red. So I want to just really thank all of you for being here, and thank you to Patrick Madden and Michael for the lovely invitation to come and to visit with your classes, and to thank all the students who came to really engage in ideas and thoughts about writing this morning, which I really, really enjoyed. And I'm excited for all of you as you are, some of you completing your path to the MFA, some of you still at the undergrad level. But it's an exciting thing, I think, to be a student of writing. I still consider myself very much a student of writing, and I feel blessed to do so. So thank you for having me and for welcoming me this morning. I'm going to read today. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to read, but I did. After some of the ideas we were talking about this morning, I was thinking a little bit about, you all had me thinking about sort of momentum and how we continue to write, right? And how we sort of hold on to momentum when we find it. And in the trajectory of this book becoming a book, there is one piece, a chapter on Red, that was an essay that really helped me understand what I wanted to do as a writer. And as a writer who's also a lover of art and a lover of language and a lover of image and a lover of color and all of those things. And so this is an essay that really helped me capture that voice and sort of step fully into that voice as a writer. And really when that essay came together, it really gave a lot of momentum to the book coming together as well. So. A Chapter on Red. And this essay begins with an epigraph from Hans Hofmann, who is a painter. It is not the form that dictates the color, but the color that brings out the form. First, a heart, or 3, drawn and cut from construction paper, nearly twice the size of my hand, so that when I held them, waiting for my mother, they balanced, weightless, on my palm. My mother knelt with a handful of pins pursed between her lips. One by one, she adhered the hearts in a row down the front of my dress, above the bottom hem, at my waistline, at the center of my chest. A tissue paper crown and glittery staff completed my coronation. Released into the hallowed night, I yelled, "Off with their heads!" as I trailed the superhero cape of my older brother through the echoing hallways of our Bronx apartment building in search of tricks or treats. How easy it seemed to craft something lovely from paper and scissors, and a heart no less, so perfectly trimmed, at once sharp-edged and smooth, in triptych against my white cotton gown. Or perhaps even before the hearts there was Matisse. I would sit before a small reproduction of Matisse's red studio painting that hung in my parents' bedroom, which, when the futon was folded away, was also the living room. For the longest time, I thought Matisse's studio must be a room in a dollhouse, somewhere the queen herself might reside. Awash in Venetian red, the canvas depicts what the artist must have seen before him as he worked, a still life of propped paintings and sculptures. The artworks, rendered in detail and color, are indicated only by negative gaps in the red surface. Of his painting, Matisse once remarked, "I find that all of these things only become what they are to me when I see them together with the color red." A grandfather clock stands in the center of the compilation. Matisse eliminated its hands, as if in the space of the artist's studio, time is suspended, as if all attention were given to the process of seeing a retrospective housed in a single color. "It might help you better relax," my father told me as he tried to explain an exercise he learned in art school to focus the mind on a single color and every instance in which it occurs. "Try red," he said. And because often my father's ideas have a way of taking root in my mind as a steady preoccupation, I try his exercise. On my way to work, I take an inventory: traffic lights, stop signs, a fire engine, a tinsel holiday wreath tied and forgotten on a telephone pole, an array of lipsticks and nail polish, headscarves and jewelry, the laces of a young boy's tennis shoe, the looped handle of a baby's rattle. And just when it seems the world is alive in red, the cat that sleeps on the floor of the neighborhood bodega slinks lazily from around a corner with a fresh bead of blood on its whiskers, as if to remind us coffee and cigarette regulars that something is always dying. It isn't long before my catalog of red inhabits the mind, integrating and then segregating memory through a siphon of red. I see the construction paper hearts. I see the wheels of my roller skates, the bright handlebars of a new bicycle I first rode without training wheels along the Hudson, the deep chrome of the vintage Schwinn I found in a thrift store in Colorado, and between those two bicycles alone, there are 20-some-odd years to color in. Can I tell the story of a single color? The painters did it, Rothko and Hoffman, Yves Klein too, but he may better serve an essay on blue. Can we fulfill our memories in monochrome, bathe words in color as Matisse dared bathe his canvas? Before I saw, I tasted. When I was 8 years old playing catch with my brother, I ran for the ball and within an instant lay flat on the ground with a mouthful of concrete. My 2 front teeth, the new adult teeth of which I was so proud, lay somewhere in the salty mess that unfolded in my mouth, the bitter taste like a penny splintered and molten along my tongue, churned against my raw gums. I hardly registered what happened, that I had tripped on the sidewalk's uneven pavement. But I made the catch that day. I remember only because of how tightly I gripped the ball, refusing to let go. Even as my brother and the neighbors came running, even as my father took me inside, shielding my eyes from the bathroom mirror as he cleaned my wounds, my face and hands and knees throbbed for days. As I healed, my friends came to see the new front teeth my dentist fashioned from caps of enamel around the ruins of my incisors. My brother brought his friends by after school to show off like a crime scene the place where my face stained the sidewalk, which was a little more than an ink blot or splattering of paint. And yet it recorded, like evidence, my first lesson in glory and pain, of how quickly we fall between the two, how humbled we become by our own missteps. I was even younger, 6 or 7, when I learned of the birds. The hummingbirds were my favorite, the ruby-throated in particular, the one variety most likely to stray east of the Mississippi, so I waited for them to visit New York. When I discovered they were attracted to red, I became consumed, concocting nectar from sugar water and food coloring. I filled feeders and mason jars and placed them on the windowsills and fire escape. Most bird-pollinated flowers are red and rich in nectar. But is it simply because the honeybees can't decipher them? How odd that the color red, which at the end of the spectrum carries the longest wave of light, is inconspicuous to the bees, and therefore left for the birds. Imagine a male cardinal so effortlessly designed to attract, appearing to a yellow jacket as little more than a notion against the bare winter trees and snow. This, my first lesson in matters of the birds and bees, that color holds the power to entice and allure. And since then, I've seen it countless times in the plucked look skin has when touched by frost or wind or sun, when flushed with sex or panic or desire, like the scarf-flaunting matadors in Spain courting their bulls, or the rose of the flamenco dancer following the rhythmic clap of the castanets. Like the polish I'm never bold enough to wear on my fingernails, the lipstick I've never cared for, the blush I find laughable because my cheeks redden on their own under even the slightest pretense. Summer afternoons, I got in the habit of eating pomegranates with the boy next door. He was the son of our Greek landlady, a woman who spat over my head and told me I was beautiful. Raised in a world of secular bohemia, I found unending curiosity in Greek Orthodox traditions. We'd sit on the back porch, each with our orb, pulling at its rough rind, breaking into it as if a crystal ball that held secrets we wanted nothing more than to devour. We brushed the juice from our fingers onto our bare knees. The color took to our skin like watercolor. The jeweled kernels, ruby arrows burst in my mouth, their flavor like the first boy I kissed, the first boy I swore on instinct to love and failed to. This was the same fruit the landlady had us smash against our doorstep before the first stride over the threshold on New Year's morning. And like the red-dyed egg nestled in the bread we ate the night before, it was a mark of fortune and safety. Now, in the small town where I live, the locals raise Chinese lanterns along Main Street to mark the new year. But I'm still curious about pomegranates. I still raise one to my nose each year as I pass them in the grocery store. What children are sitting on back steps courting sweetness? How many stride over doorsteps where the same fruit juice has seeped into stone, dried and grown sticky in the sun? The mark of another year, broken open, promising to be new. A friend of mine, a florist in town, once gave me a lesson in roses. Deep reds signify burning passion, she told me, while lighter hues mean romance. Crimson is the color of sex, which she takes time to explain is different than romance, and not to be confused with burgundy, which connotes desire. The symbolism is accredited, she assures me, but I have my doubts. Didn't the ancient Greeks believe roses came from the blood of Adonis and were as much a symbolic of love and affinity as of growth and decay? What about red chrysanthemums, one of the 4 noble gentlemen who mark the seasons in the East? Or the poppies for remembrance that line the castles in Ireland? I find more enchantment in lilacs and wildflowers. We don't order bouquets for wit or humor. Not enough people send flowers for valor and distinction. I wasn't surprised to learn that in 1949, the same year that Matisse's painting of his studio subsumed in a field of cadmium red, one on view at New York's Museum of Modern Art, Mark Rothko began exploring abstraction by painting soft-edged blocks in diaphanous colors. Of Matisse's canvas, Rothko said, "When you look at the painting, you become that color. You become totally saturated with it." And this seems more or less to explain Rothko's own process for addressing his work, the way he seemed to will or breathe the paint onto his canvases in a slow spinning of reds and yellows, like gossamer, like screens. In a painting, we expect such color to last, to be present, as long as we care to notice. But what, I want to say to Rothko as I try to saturate these pages, what happens when color fades? For centuries, red was the treasure of the Incas and the Aztecs, and then the wealth of red belonged to Spain. When it is fresh, carmine pigment made from the bodies of cochineal beetles is one of the purest dyes produced in the natural world, but it is also the most fleeting. J.M.W. Turner painted with carmine even though he knew of its impermanence, and so his work, his bequest to the nation of England, was far more colorful than the signature gray stormscapes we see today. Imagine an artist trying to capture the moment of a setting sun, unleashing a brilliant slash of light through the clouds. As he reached to dip his brush, how could he not choose the best pigment? The perfect red, even though he knew it wouldn't last. What if words became illegible after they were written? Wouldn't we write them all the same? Unconcerned with posterity, Turner cared little of a painting's longevity, but of the very moment it was created. Red, vanishing and evanescent, was his immediate, near-fugitive desire. When I was 18 and moved west to Colorado, I thought I would mourn the East Coast foliage. My mother sent care packages filled with origami cranes and folded stars nestled in a bed of pressed maple leaves, pieces of home, she called them, as if tilting a shadow box or still life. But home has always been a variable, and some years ago when I finally left Colorado and returned to the Northeast, it was the Red Rock Canyons that I craved. I prefer red in its organic incarnations, the rust-red creek beds, sea oats and sumac leaves, the blooms of algae that color the Red Sea. But the human hand that paints in red or the manufactured commissioned varieties of red satisfy my belief in the duality of things. We have co-opted the natural shades of fruits and flowers and assigned them to passion, to seduction, and, be it forbidden or sanctioned, to love. Pigments and paints are poised to accentuate and allure, and yet we color stop signs and fire engines red. Emergency exits and security warnings all bear the color of fear and trepidation, of warning. Waves of taillights and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles color tragic nights. No wonder that the reason some stones appear red is the same reason our blood runs red. Iron colors human and earthly temperament. Science teaches this. But what about the stories and myths we tell ourselves, the meaning we make in order to endure? According to Iroquois legend, after 3 hunters killed the great bear, the animal's blood fell from the sky to color the leaves. And because I learned this in elementary school in the portable planetarium our science teacher erected in the gymnasium, and because the image still haunts me as beautiful, it is the story I will tell my children if ever they are born. That death and demise often lead to splendor. Red is the dying leaves, just as dying stars exhibit a Mars-like tint before they go, evidence of their passing, yet just as much evidence of their life. Before death, there will forever be the injuries of love. The first, my father, who broke the bones in his hand against a table as my parents negotiated their divorce. The second, my first love, who caught a ricocheting shard from the glass he threw against the wall on the eve of our inevitable split. His ring finger, nearly severed, glistened scarlet to the bone, and though he was the patient in the hospital emergency room, my whole body ached as if I had fallen, pieces of me lost upon impact, calcified, dislodged. I would ache this way for years after, recoil at the thought of the raw vacancy, the bare tissue. And again, the markings, this time left shamefully on the carpet and on the pillowcase I used to wrap his hand. The color dried and deepened to rustic burgundy. Wasn't that my florist's term for desire? Or was it the earthly red of Van Gogh's severed despair after Gauguin threatened to leave him? Far from the fleeting flush of a lover's chest, when we cut our bonds, such injuries stain. Red is the color of love and lunacy, of infatuation and its failure, of how slowly, tolerantly, as if in a pact of silence, we drift between the two. When I look up the word red, I find its origins in the Indo-European rud and later the Greek erythros. In Sanskrit, rakta is the word used for red and for blood. In Comanche, the word akapi is used for red and color and circle too, which suggests something fundamental, something all-encompassing. Red is the color of beauty in Russia, of luck and good fortune in China. It is the color of Greek tragedies, epic battles of glory and salvation. Ancient Romans painted their gladiators and heroes in red. They washed the statues of gods and emperors with the same ruddy pigments that can be found in the murals of Pompeii. Here, we might gossip over red carpet celebrities and in the same breath recall catching a red-handed thief. We might anticipate the pomp and circumstance of a red-letter day as much as we curse the red herring of deceit. We hang flags of patriotism and revolution, landmark districts of prostitution and lust. We say red eye, and we mean flying overnight, but it is also what I call crying until morning, the kind of weeping, silent, full, that might be reserved for blue, except that it hoods our lids and circles the underside of the eye in red. The kind of weeping I learned from my mother, the kind you wake up to the next morning and nurse like jet lag or a hangover, faced, puffed, swollen, a little older around the eyes. The red of rage and grief and euphoric sadness, the red eye of weightlessness, of rebirth. Or maybe it's the dim tint of an evening bar which used to lure me like a moth toward light, nights after all my friends retired into taxicabs and slinked away to their Brooklyn apartments. I wandered the city looking for clues into unexplained grief and found the inevitable cliché cocktailed in the pouty stranger at the end of a bar who, once we had stumbled to his apartment, showed me his paintings, all brooding drips and globs that, in the dark, hinted at kindness. He went on and on about the New York school until I threatened to leave. When I did slip away, the air a little bit pink as it turned heavily to day, the metal door to his walk-up that shut forcibly behind me, a door that still floats like a buoy in the shadowy sea of the Bowery, was solid and padlocked and red. And while on the subject of doors, let this serve as an entryway into my memory of the red-doored church in the old neighborhood, landmark of my greatest curiosities, my greatest shame, that I used to circle as a girl, trying to learn something, waiting for its sober advice. In many cities, houses of faith and worship are marked by similar doors signifying safe haven. Once, Hebrew slaves were instructed to brush lamb's blood over their doors to protect their firstborn. Catholic churches paint their front doors red, the blood of Christ and martyrs, to mark the borders of holy ground, the threshold where physical or spiritual harm could not penetrate, where pursuers could pursue no further, the red of sanctuary and protection. If I were to return to, if I were to safeguard or time capsule one image of red, it would be the paper hearts, royal insignia of my girlhood make-believe and the simplicity of young desire. My brother and I paraded as our heroes, he alternating between Superman and Captain America, me reluctantly assigned to Wonder Woman, a fantastical duo with hearts primed to save the world. Or a single queen ready to issue the brutal destiny of beheaded hope. And if those hearts seemed too naive, perhaps instead a package of red doilies that I bought in college at a thrift shop, the same shop with the stunning vintage Schwinn, that I strung into lacy curtains, still believing in paper-made pleasures. And they lasted, too, nearly as long as that first bout of love before the wind took them. I think sometimes of their fate, wonder what bird may have swooped up their shreds to insulate its nest, what child discovered them littering the sidewalk during a game of catch, how the paper crimped and fell to the ground like fresh autumn leaves. The next time I visit my father, I tell him I no longer see things the same, and to some extent that's true. Color seems more evident now, more laden with testimony, with consequence. Try red, my father had said, so simple, and now I notice it everywhere. In the cranberries and rhubarb stalks at the farmer's market, the cider apples and bell peppers, and yes, the pomegranates too, in the book bindings that wall the library, the neon sign kept on at the diner, or the historic brick buildings that accentuate downtown. Of course, the painters knew not only how color is revealed in form, but how form, a synthesis of light and reflection, is just as much revealed in color. In the city, sirens, sound and lights flash through the streets, delivering their cargo of pain and sadness. A 19-year-old who took one in the gut on Heath Avenue after holding the door for some thug's sister, leaving behind the red pool that must have swelled beneath him, the stain of chivalry's passing. But what if the sirens and lights signify a heart being rushed for transplant, or an expectant mother about to birth her only child? The fire engines rush too, and a family may have lost their house, but what if a child is rescued from a fearful height or a battered home? Stalled traffic lights on Broadway mean frustrated commuters, but it also means more time to breathe, stillness in a frenzied city. Color has taken possession of me, Paul Klee once said of his work. His canvases reveal color and shapes, stick figures and fish, houses and hearts, in a childlike, sophisticated meditation. Here we begin and end with the heart, because what greater possession exists? Not just in color, not simply through this red, by which I mean rose-colored lens, but as it adheres and tears, as it is pinned and stripped bare. It may be an impossible idea to tell the story of a color, but perhaps we might glimpse a chapter that contains a single human experience, a retrospective of memory, the folded edges of paper and pleasure and pain, tucked into a chamber, a studio, a cabinet of curiosity. When oxygenated, when exposed, it pulses in crimson and scarlet, carmine, red, at once the longest wavelength of visible light and the first color we lose sight of at twilight. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions, so if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
So, and this is just me thinking, so as pre-reading, we read your piece on chairs, and I present this piece on red, and they seem similar to me in that they're examining an issue from multiple perspectives, or an idea from multiple perspectives. Like I think of like cubism, like Picasso or something like that. So I guess my question is, what if I am kind of right in that assumption, what draws you to that style of storytelling or just narrative?
Yeah, that's a great question. We talked about this a little bit this morning, and I think generally in my process of writing and sort of putting essays together, I tend to, I'm going to sound a little bit repetitive from this morning, but get a little bit restless in terms of, you know, my ideas and in terms of my ability to kind of sustain narrative in particular. The chair piece that you mentioned, you know, has a particular narrative that I'm exploring this one night, et cetera. But I think one of the reasons I love the essay so much as a form is that it allows me to meander a little bit. It allows me to sort of to write in the way that I think and in the way that I, you know, associate, and in the way that I want to reach for other bits and pieces to bring into my own story, to try to sort of heighten it to something greater, or to some, you know, to reach for more meaning that way. So I think it is, you know, it is very much kind of a roundabout process that I tend to engage in with writing, that, as you note, sort of is, you know, excited by the idea of bringing in multiple ideas and seeing how sort of vast a range of information I can kind of play off of as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So in that same vein, first off, I wanted to compliment you on the turn between the birds and the bees and the birds and the bees. Like
Yeah.
that made me sit up, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was such just fantastic writing.
Cool. Thank you.
But I just wanted to know, like, about how you connected ideas, because that's something that takes a lot of thought. I've had a lot of inspiration where it's like, oh, got lucky with that one. But I have a feeling that there's not so much luck, but skill and careful thought. So how do you organize your ideas like that, and how do you follow your writing process and make it into something that is this masterful construction?
Wow. Well, I will say that particular birds and bees, that sort of was luck in that situation, because I was researching about the birds and the bees and found this, you know, found that sort of snippet of information about the bees not being able to decipher red, right? And so then just naturally my mind went to that idea of birds and bees. So that's kind of was a happy accident in that specific case. But I think generally it is a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to do because it's, I would argue, really easy to get it wrong, you know, to like bring in too much information or to kind of jump around all over the place and until your reader's just lost in this murky sea of your random thoughts, right? And so I think part of the work of revision in particular, the work of sort of revisiting ideas and and imagery, et cetera, is very much a process of trying to find the connective tissue or the potential for connective tissue within or between those images, between the ideas themselves. And often that will look like, for me at least, on the page, doing a little bit of charting of those threads, seeing how, you know, I can talk about falling on the concrete and then, you know, evoke that notion of sort of a tooth being dislodged when I'm talking about the pain of watching someone I love, you know, being hurt, right? And that sense of dislodging, you know, that's going on within me as well. So I think it's about, you know, spending a lot of time with the writing, spending a lot of time thinking about language, thinking about how language can further meaning, or how language can help to bring a reader from, you know, point A to point B to point C when you're giving them that information in, you know, a very vastly different order, you know. And I think, you know, I think a lot of it is just sort of the work of going back and revisiting a lot and seeing how you can potentially, you know, create different layers in what you're writing and what you're working with. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah. Yeah.
So can you remember any red things that came up in your early process that didn't make the final cut, and why?
So many red things. You're all gonna leave this room and like see red everywhere, right? That's my plan. Yeah, there was definitely, you know, there were definitely a lot more sections that I initially wrote that didn't really make it into the final version of the essay. I'm trying to think of a few. There's sort of the thread of skin in the piece, that, you know, when skin gets red or when we blush or that kind of idea. And I remember having this whole kind of meditation on a baby that had, you know, very red cheeks. It just didn't work. So that was out. There were definitely others that I'm sure will come to me as I think more about it. But somewhere in my computer there's a folder of like the red images that didn't make the cut. Yeah.
Kind of a silly question, but is red your favorite color?
No, not at all. I actually don't really like the color red. I know, and it's like, hello, it's everywhere. And I shouldn't say that. I don't dislike the color red. It's a perfectly fine color. It's really not a color that I have any association or connection to other than this, you know, other than sort of having deeply engaged with thinking about that color while I was writing this essay. And I think more to the point, I was interested in how, I think it's a color that's sort of prevalent, right? And you know, I think part of why it was so exciting to me to follow this thread of thought, or this train of thought about the color red, is because there was so much out there. There's so many cultures that think about red and use red in different ways, and so much symbolism around that color. Which is not to say, you know, you wouldn't find all that with green or blue or anything else. Certainly blue, that's been done pretty well by Maggie Nelson already, so I wasn't gonna go there, right? So red just seemed like an interesting, you know, place to start. And I did have a few of those initial images already. You know, specifically the experience of, you know, the partner that cut his finger, and the idea of, you know, hummingbirds, which were really important to me when I was young, the ruby-throated hummingbird. So there were a few images that sort of brought me to that color, and then I kind of just took it from there. Yeah.
So my question is, as soon as I heard, I didn't know the essay until you read it, and I really enjoyed hearing it. But the first thing that came to my mind was Rothko. So I was happy that you came to him. But I'm curious to know a little bit about your experience of a Rothko painting. Maybe we all have these moments in our lives that transport us, and one of mine is sitting in the modern London
That's a really interesting question. I think on some level, speaking to this essay in particular, there were moments of real closeness in some of the images, right? To the point where I could still feel how it felt to lose my teeth on the concrete, right? Like that's a very visceral, like very real memory that I have, and a really sensory experience that I went through. So much so that, see like kids losing teeth, and like I still remember that, it's just like when you lose a tooth, that your gums, it's all raw. It just kind of makes me shiver all the time. So there's something about sort of the sensory experience that I think color and texture and all of those things really speak to, and in a way, allow our memories to be present often, So the sections of the essay that I think really relate to memory and relate to those kinds of experiences, being in the hospital, falling on the floor, even the trick-or-treating through the hallway, waiting for my mom to pin those hearts on my dress, those feel very real and very close to me. Whether or not they come across as being intimate moments on the page for you as a reader or listener. But as a writer, those moments are really intimate and close. And I think in terms of thinking about sort of when we're writing anything, an essay, a story, a poem, we're always thinking about sort of the level of engagement, right, as we go along. And for me, to sustain it with that much closeness or that much intimacy wouldn't have worked, right? And so I every once in a while I want to sort of step out of that and say, well, here's this experience, it's like, of losing my tooth and thinking about red and tasting blood and all of that stuff. But then, like, here's how Matisse used red in his painting, right? Like, let's think about how, like, in Chinese cultures, like, red stands for good fortune, right? So it's kind of trying to find a balance between the closeness and the distance, to sort of use the terms that you threw out, which is, it's tricky. I don't know if it works or not. You'd have to tell me, but thanks. Bentley. Hi. Thanks.
So I was just curious about your growth as a writer, and if, too personal to ask, is there any sort of breakthrough that you remember having, and then, as far as like finally grasping any concept, how that changed your writing? Just because I'm sure there's some lessons that
Yeah. I think the biggest sort of breakthrough, if we're going to call it that, was certainly my shift to the essay as a form, which we talked about a little bit this morning. Sort of thinking about how form itself can really expand the possibility of language and writing for me. Whereas I think for a while I was trying to, I knew that there was material I wanted to work with. I knew that there were stories I wanted to tell. But for a while, the idea of narrative I was grounded in that, and sort of feeling like I owed more to narrative and to trying to sustain narrative, which I was committed to doing on a lot of ways because I wanted to explore certain material. But at the same way, I wasn't really able, I never felt like I was getting anywhere until I really understood the essay as a form and all that contains in terms of possible, directions and movements and turns you can make as a writer. So that was a real churning point for me, and that sort of broke things open in the sense that I felt a lot of freedom when I understood what form could really do when you kind of break open the bounds of narrative structure, and bring in, have more of an allegiance to your thoughts and your ideas as they come, and the sort of power of association. So that really opened up a lot of room for me as a writer, I think, to grow, and to just explore, and really to just have a little more fun, ultimately, when I write as well. Which I think is like, it's worth saying, right? We should have fun when we're writing. Do you all think it's fun? I mean, it's hard, but it should be also fun and exploratory and adventurous, and I think that the essay, has taught me that. So I feel grateful. I'm so glad you send flowers and cards, because I do too. I love sending cards, and I love buying flowers. I'm really big on, like, if I go to a dinner party, I don't bring any. I bring flowers. I think that's like a really nice thing to bring. Who doesn't like flowers? So, tell me your question again.
What other things, how do you get to like send flowers for Valor? What other occasions do you send flowers?
Oh, I see. That is a great question. I think we should send flowers, daily, really. I mean, why not? What's the reason not to send flowers? I don't know. For just thinking of someone? For it being Tuesday? Or one of the reasons, actually, why I sort of stumbled on that idea is because, so in those of you who have read some of the book, there's also this play between, I grew up in New York City, have traveled a bit, and, have recently, in the past several years of my life, been living in rural sort of Vermont. And I often feel kind of a push and pull between the city and the country, and place kind of plays into my writing a lot. And one of the things that I miss more than anything about New York City, like more than like being able to order takeout or like great restaurants, is the bodegas along the street selling flowers, and the fact that any hour of the night, you can buy a bouquet of flowers just on the street. I love that about the city. That is one of my favorite things about like being back home. And it's because it's sort of, to circle back to something else we were talking about this morning, it's because you can stop and you can pay attention and you can look and you can see something beautiful in the middle of a city, right? And that's the kind of thing that I really value. So I'll have to think more about all the reasons why we should send flowers, but I know you can get them any hour of the day in New York City. That was a strange answer, I'm sorry.
Well, let's give Jericho another round of applause.
Thank you so much, thank you.